Hello and welcome to Hair in the Hawthorn. I am Kate Ray and I'm your host, and I have my partner in crime as usual. And I'm not going to take the mickey or give him any new nicknames other than Starsky and Hutch and Mulder and Scully. I've got Dr. Neil Rushton with me.
Hello,
Just us
Kate.
pair. How are
Nice
you
to be
doing?
with you. Oh, I'm okay. Yeah, good to be with you again. Uh, 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 yeah, this is going to be a bit of a retro, isn't it? It's we're going to.
Yeah.
So some people will have heard us talking about our own experiences before, but we decided that it would be a good idea for people who are new to the channel, maybe want to know where we're coming from, why we're so interested in the fairies, and this is definitely one of the reasons that we both are. So we're going to have just a little bit of a chat about our past experiences with the fairies.
Well, we kind of made mention to it quite a few times throughout the podcasts, and whether it be amongst ourselves or with other people, but it has been a long time. I know both of us have talked about our experiences on other people's podcasts, and you first came on this show as a guest to talk about your experiences. So that is further down. However, we just thought it would be nice to refresh for people who were asking about expanding on what we have experienced, not just sort of the academic side of things, the writing side of things, but our own beliefs and experiences. And one that always fascinates me is we've both had, I would say, multiple experiences. Would that be fair to say? Multiple.
Yes.
Um, but one of the ones that fascinates me in terms of uh, us coming together to podcast and the friendship that came out of that was that our very first experiences that we both had centre around ancient places in the UK, which, we have spoke about ancient places and what is the attraction for the fae folk, what is the folklore for those places, having fairy attachments to them. And yeah, my first experience was definitely something that was completely out of the blue. And I know that yours was quite shocking, as these things are, and made even more so, I think, by the place, the space, the environment, and the state of mind that we were both in.
Yeah.
Do you want to start us off, Neil, and just talk through your first encounter with a fairy being?
Yeah. Okay. I don't mind going first. Age before beauty.
Of course.
Um, uh, yeah. So again, apologies for those who've heard this before, but here we go. So this is a West Kennet long barrow, which is a Neolithic burial chamber in Wiltshire, near sort of south of Swindon, in the Avebury complex. So you've got Avebury Stone Circle, you've got West Kennet Long Barrow, East Kennet Long Barrow, the Stone Avenue, you've got the Sanctuary. It's sort of like a fossilized Neolithic landscape, Silbury Hill, Swallowhead Springs, fossilized Neolithic landscape, very, very special place, which I've always very much had a special place in my heart. And this is way back in 1996, summer of 1996. Ah, if only it were the summer of 1996,
Oh, yes.
before everything went wrong. Um, uh, and I was studying archaeology at the University of Southampton at the time for my undergraduate, and the uh, uh, but I'd already gotten into the folklore by that stage, and especially the fairy folklore. I had a fascination with it for a few years at very much a folkloric level. I was looking into folklore surrounding the fairies and understanding how much there was and how it was and how fascinating it was, and also how some of it, quite a lot of it, centered around prehistoric sites in this country. And there was a lot of folklore connected with the fairies, prehistoric sites, and that was a great interest for me. And again, I've said this before many times, but I was very much warned away from that when I was doing the archaeology degree. Don't go there. we don't want to talk about folklore. It's of no interest. It's of no intrinsic value towards interpreting the archaeology of any of these sites, which yeah, well, I fundamentally disagreed then, and even more so now. So although I did keep it out of my studies at a personal level, I went forward with the investigation. And I'd been to West Kennet Long Barrow many times. Just a brief description. If we were more up to speed, I'd be flashing a picture of it on screen now. But uh, for those of you, you can easily Google it if you've never been there. And it is basically a long barrow, about 100 yards long, which is just an earth mound. And at the front, it's lined with big, big sarsen stones from the nearby Marlborough Downs. And there is an entrance into the passageway and a main chamber and four side chambers where the burials were found in the 1950s when it was excavated. And it was they did mess around with it a little bit in the 1950s, and they put a little skylight above the main back chamber. I'm quite sure why they did that, but it's the 1950s. That's what they did, and so it hasn't been fundamentally altered, but there has been a bit of messing around with it, and so you sort of weave in between these big sarsen stones into the passageway, and of course it's very dark, but you can see because of the skylight. If it's still light, you can see the back passage, the passage to the back chamber, the main chamber, and so it's summer 1996, and I was meditating on my own in the chamber, the main chamber at the back of the barrow. And I just gotten into meditation for the last few months for various reasons. And I was about 20 minutes into very, very good silent meditation, nobody else around. And that is when the fairy type entity appeared. I should say I had my eyes open during the meditation. I think it wasn't closed eyes meditation. And well, what did he look like? That's what people always want to know. And I'm never quite able to properly describe him. The nearest I ever get to it is very much like a Brian Frood fairy. Sort of a little gnarled being about a foot high, um, with sort of distorted human features, like a humanoid, but not a human, and dressed in some kind of archaic clothes with a hat. And that creature, remember, the sun. It's still light. The sun's going down, so you can see okay. And he suddenly seemed to pop into existence at one end of the passage and walk up the passage towards me. He got to within a few feet, 5 feet maybe, and looked at me. No sounds, no voices, just looked at me. There was absolute silence, and I was awake. I hadn't fallen asleep during this meditation. I just can't reiterate that enough. And he looked at me and kind of cocked his head almost in an inquisitive way, as though to say, why can you see me? That's my interpretation. And then he turned around, walked back down the passageway, and went in to one of the side chambers, on the left as I was looking at it, the last one nearest the entrance, and went into it. That was it. That was the experience. And of course, I'd quickly come round from the meditation once this is done. And I realized I had no fear at all. There was no fear. It was just, oh, this is interesting. What's going on here? Who are you? What are you? Um, Although I didn't ask those questions at the time, this is in my head. At the time, I was just silent, just watching him without any fear. So once I'd composed myself, I get up and still thinking, well, is he still in that side chamber? And I go down slightly hesitantly, look at the side chamber, and there's nothing there. And that was it. That was the experience. And it's something that has really stuck with me ever after, as it as it would. And again, we talked about this before, but when you think about memories, most of your memories are quite low resolution. I what did I do yesterday? I can't really remember. But when you have an experience, a numinous experience such as that, it hardwires it into your mind. And when I think back on it now, if I were to close my eyes now, I can see his face and I can recreate that. It's all happening in 30 seconds, less than a
Mm.
minute anyway. And I can recreate that in very high resolution memory. And I think that's the case for a lot of people who have these extraordinary experiences with fairy type entities. And that was it. And so the after effect of that is, well, it's a form of gnosis, isn't it? As always with any kind of supernatural experience, if you're hearing someone else talking about it, you will always go, oh, well, rationalize it this way and that way, and it might have been that. But if you've had the direct experience of it happening to you, no one can take it away from you. You know exactly what was happening. I was not asleep. I hadn't been taking any psychedelic drugs, any alcohol, nothing. I was in pure meditative state, which may have, we talk about, state of consciousness and observing these entities later. But it changed my life because suddenly I realized that's the first real supernatural experience I've had. Although we'll talk about one that was actually earlier later, but that wasn't quite as visceral as that. It wasn't visual. And suddenly it was like, oh wow,
Mm.
there are things in this reality that shouldn't be in this reality, and I've experienced it directly. So that's the story of what me and West Kennet long. Um, so, the segue of it, we haven't rehearsed this, but the segue now is absolutely beautiful because there's another long barrow in your first encounter story, isn't there?
Well done. Yeah, and there's more connections than just the long barrow because when you said that yours occurred in 1996, my maths and chronology of my life is absolutely terrible. But I actually think it may have happened. Mine may have happened in the same year. I'll have to do my maths on that, but it was around about that sort of mid 90s, early to mid 90s. And I think the backstory to this is an interesting one as well, and one that has connections with a future event, which still blows my mind. So back then, I had very briefly, I had a friends base of people of all different ages. I didn't knock around with people. I was school aged, so I was 15, 16, and I didn't really knock around with people of my own age. They were definitely an older set that I hung around with, and it was a Friday night, and I was at a house party, a small house party, a gathering, and we were bored. We were all skint, so there was no alcohol, no other recreations going off. And somebody had the bright idea to pick a book off the shelf, which I'll tell you the title of in a bit. Now, this book contained magical, mystical places, actual places around Britain that you could visit for all different kinds of reasons. So, in there, you have your usual haunted places, sacred wells, you've got Glastonbury Tor, that kind of thing. So, the idea was that we were to randomly open the book at a page, and then somebody would literally stick a pin blindfold on one of the sections of that page, which would give us a location. And that was done. And then this kind of graduated from a bored idea into us all bundling into a friend of mine's battered old car and driving the 100 or so miles down to Wayland Smithy. So where the pin had landed was on the Uffington White Horse. So that was the destination. We drove. It was incredibly late at night when we set off. Probably nearing 12 o'clock. And back then, obviously, we didn't have sat nav. You don't have your phone to find out where you're going. So we were doing this on a really scruffy map of Britain. And we thought we were pretty much in the vicinity of where the White Horse was. So I decided to park up and see if we could get some sleep. And it was summertime, but it was obviously cold at night. So I don't think any of us slept very well, but enough to be woken up in the morning by a sharp knock on the car window and a very disgruntled farmer telling us to get out his bloody road because we were blocking his tractor. And it was quite fortuitous that we found this farmer because we were near the Uffington Horse, but we were actually at the back slope of the hill that it's on. And he pointed us in the right direction. We would never have found it otherwise. So he pointed us in the right direction, and off we went. This was early hours in the morning. Sun was just coming up, and as we got out of the car, it was quite bright as the sun was coming up. But as we reached the summit of the slope of the Uffington Horse, this mist came out of nowhere. I mean, the whole experience from start to finish was probably one of the most eerie and magical experiences. So this mist sort of enveloped around us, and we were all sort of fanning out and saying, "Well, where is the white horse? Where's the chalk horse?" And at that moment, somebody had said, "What's that over there?" And that the mist cleared, and there was a herd of deer just sort of milling around that hadn't heard us or seen us. And it was one of those moments where we looked over and the deer looked at us, and then they scattered. And as they scattered, I realised I was stood in the eye of the Uffington Horse. And it was, how could we have missed this? So we spent some time watching the sunrise, and it was absolutely glorious, absolutely glorious. And somebody had mentioned, and I'd never heard of Wailing Smithy, that kind of thing. It interested me, but it wasn't on my radar at that time in my life. And they said, "Oh, we can walk down towards it." I was with a party of three guys who were all a bit older than me and had a good long stride on their legs. So they were, always in front, always sort of charging up ahead like, stomping lads of that age do. And I was quite happy, the sun was warming, and the way you walk down to Wayland Smithy from the horse, often the sides of the path start banking up, and then you've got farm hedgerows on top of these mounds of earth either side of the pathway. And as they were walking on, and we weren't that far from Wayland Smithy at the time, I kept hearing the strangest sound that was like, I kind of describe it like a bit like the clangers, sort of that whistly, hummy tone, or maybe the mice from Bagpuss. So it's got that kind of nasal, whistly hum to it. And it was coming from either bank. And I'm not talking about one or two, I'm talking, it sounded like hundreds of things making this noise, all kind of in different levels of tunes and tonality. And it would go in waves, but some that I could hear very, very close by. And I'm trying in my head to fathom out what on earth would make this unusual noise. And I heard these things rustling in the thicket at the bottom of the hedgerows. So I decided that I was going to see if I could see one. So I was peering and sort of, trying to part the grass and trying to find out what these creatures were. And I heard one that was particularly close, and a couple of attempts of me diving on the kind of thicket and parting it, and I did. And in between my hands, where the grass had parted, was this creature. And I, in my head, called it a gnome. I now know very, very, very different. This is where it gets weird. This is where it gets incredibly weird. When people think about fairy encounters, they think of sylphs and they think of, pixies and whatever else. This had a flat body like a toad, and it was on all fours. So it was kind of almost pinning itself to the ground on all fours, and its head was cocked back over its shoulder. Now I looked at it and thought, well, that's a strange creature. That was my first thought. Had a very mousy head like features with downy fur down its head and its back. Now, this is the moment where I just thought, holy shit, what am I dealing with here? When my brain registered that it had a pair of tweed trousers on and red braces. And at that moment, I must have let out some kind of squeal, to which it shrieked so loud and so high pitched, it looked terrified, absolutely terrified, and shot off at a rate of knots into the bottom of the hedge. And I was stood there for what seemed like, because these things, time just moves very funny, doesn't it, in these instants. I stood there staring at this space where this thing had been, thinking, what on earth was that? The next thing that struck me is the singing had completely stopped. Completely. I look ahead and my friends are way off in the distance now. And I am just, I didn't know what to make of it. Thinking, am I going mad? What have I just seen? This thing was real. This thing was solid. I could have scooped it up and held it. It wasn't ethereal or an energy matter. It had a real solid nature to it. So I eventually jogged up to the friends that I was with, and the first thing I remember clearly, the first thing that I asked them was, "Did you hear the singing? Have you heard?" Because I just thought, of all things, they must have heard that noise. To which they were like, "No, no, no, no," just brushed it off. And then I said, "I think I've seen a gnome." You can imagine, can't you? You can imagine the reaction that I got. You're batshit crazy. What are you going on about? You see gnomes, blah, blah. And I was prodded for many years about that. So I vowed never, ever, ever to tell anybody about this encounter. So the book that we used, going back to the book, was The Magical Atlas of Britain. And I had forgotten the title of that book and had searched bookstores, online, wherever I could to try and find out what this book was, because I felt like it was part of the journey, part of that experience and the whole shebang of it. And I met up with Rob Wildwood, our friend Rob Wildwood, as he was writing his book, Magical Britain. And I met up with him at locations in Derbyshire. And it's the first time I've met him in real life, not as in on the just chatting on the internet. And I was telling him this story about what I'd seen Wailing Smithy and this gnome. And I said about the book. And I said, it's very similar to what you're writing now. And out the side of his car door, he said, "Is it this book?" And pulled it out. And it was like, how long I have searched for that book. So here I had the title. Went back home, and my mum's been on this journey with me, trying to, fathom out what this book is. I get back home and I say to my mum, "I know what the title of the book is, and I've ordered it online." And she said, "Well, Kate, that book's been sat in your old cupboard all this time." And it was like, what? And I do think that there was a reason and a meaning for me to discover that with Rob Wildwood as he was writing his amazing book, Magical Britain, because Magical Britain exceeds and expands that original Magical Atlas book. Yep. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell. So not only for me and you, it was a similar time in the 90s. We both had the experience summertime. It was, for me, and from listening to you talking about it, a life-changing experience, massively life-changing in so many different ways. It was for you in a long barrow, for me just outside of a long barrow of Wailing Smithy. And then one of the interesting things I think that comes beyond that is that we both experience medical conditions that have connection to historically and in legend and in actuality connections to other beings. It's all intertwined, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I don't think I've heard you explain that experience in that amount of detail before. Yeah, no, so that's really interesting and fascinating that it happened maybe if even if it's in the same year, it's around about the same time.
Mm,
And of course, sure enough, at a Neolithic Long Barrow, West Kennet and Wayland Smithy will be almost exactly the same date, slightly different in design, but not much. The standard Neolithic Long Barrow, and what has will have been a sacred space to our ancestors who were building it, whatever, 3000 BCE,
mm,
and that of course raised the question. Not that we're going to go into that today, but raised the question of what did they know about that space? Why were they putting that long barrow there, and why were they carrying out? Because long barrows weren't just about burials; it would have been all sorts of ritualistic behaviour going on
mhm,
in and around it. And were they plugging into something that was there before, and were they then enhancing it? And as that enhancement passed down through the centuries and millennia, so that under certain circumstances, people, we're not talking about very psychically attuned people necessarily, anyone under the right conditions and the right state of consciousness, whatever that may be, can suddenly just plug in to some ulterior reality where non-human intelligent entities can suddenly pop into your existence for whatever reason. And that you can put all sorts of interpretations and reason of the reason that it happens. But from my perspective, and it sounds as though from yours, one of the things that happened is that it changed my life. I suddenly became aware of something that I wasn't properly aware
mm.
of before, because it's happened directly to you. And imagine if that happened to everyone, how different the world would be if everyone realized how well, reality isn't, reality is a very narrow reality tunnel that we're living in on the everyday basis, whereas there's lots of things outside, and if you can tune into it, I think maybe that's the reason alone. um yeah, and just just briefly on the state of consciousness, mine was obvious because I was deliberately meditating, whereas you were not meditating. You're with your mates, and you just you're falling behind them. Could you put your finger on any kind of specific state of consciousness that you were in at the time?
I was. I remember being a typical teen me of being quite grumpy because they were leaving me behind again,
What do you
and
mean?
I felt like,
What do you mean, teen you?
oh no, I did grumpy well then. Let me tell you. Um, so yeah, I think I was a bit miffed at them for wandering off, but I was also at the same time enjoying just giving myself the space to take in, the flowers and the plants that were growing under the hedge. And I felt the spirituality of the place. I definitely felt that it was a spiritual um, a spiritual moment. The whole experience of being upon the white horse, experiencing the sun coming up and feeling the warmth of the sun. And I remember the fields being um, absolutely golden. I definitely remember the fields over the hedges being golden at that point, and how beautiful and perfect. It's one of those ones that you look back and you reminisce about that time of your life, and it was just that perfect summer's day, and the goldenness of that perfect summer's day, which we get very few and far between, I think, these days. But it's those never-ending 90s summers, isn't it? That's what it kind of takes me back to. I just want to go back to what you were saying about frequencies, and I had an odd, it may have been an algorithm moment, but an odd thing happen a couple of days ago. A friend of mine had posted a funny meme on Facebook, and it was tongue in cheek, and it was talking about frequencies, and it said that there was a certain frequency that plants exist in, and then it said something along the lines of dogs can operate in this frequency and cats can operate in between this frequency and this frequency. And basically, it was saying that dogs and cats could, in theory, converse with your house plants, which my brain just went of all the possibilities of that. And bizarrely enough, I'd never come across this theory before. And I don't think it was a serious theory, but literally skipped over to Instagram. And one of the reels that came up pretty quickly was a pet psychic. And she was talking about how she'd had a conversation with a cocker spaniel, because this is what pet psychics do. They turn it, they tune into your pets and ask them questions. And she said this particular cocker spaniel was talking to her about his friends, and he said that he had a Great Dane that was his best friend, and saying about how they got on. And then she said the most unusual thing happened. He said that one of his best friends at home, and she was expecting it to be one of the pet parents or one of the family members. The Cocker Spaniel had told her that his best friend at home was a spider plant, and I think it was called Lucy or something like that, or Lulu. And the conversations that they had about the family and the dynamics of the family. But I'm sat there going, what is going on? Is the universe trying to tell me? I have a lot of house plants. I do have quite a lot of house plants, probably of all kinds of different frequencies. I fear that my dog is inundated with plant chatter now. That's where I'm at. But I
Mate,
mean, the
mate,
point of me, go on.
that would explain some of Wilma, your dog's behaviour, maybe.
Oh yes, oh yes, she's very odd, bless her. But going back to we do function as human beings, thinking that we have the capacity to be able to understand everything around us, and we're very ignorant to the fact that we are limited in all our capabilities. We're limited
Yes.
in our range of being able to see just optically, how we interpret things optically, things like different light levels, frequencies, sound. We are so incredibly limited that when you're opened up to something that's outside of your understanding of your own um, understanding of the world, like having a fairy encounter, it just makes you kind of go, what else is going to go? What else is out there? What else is possible?
Yeah.
And for me, it was that growing feeling of everything's possible.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything. Every theory that we can come up with, every god, every supernatural being, every alien. And I remember at that time being so overwhelmed with that feeling that everything was possible that I couldn't process it. I found it very, very difficult to process.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I had an easier time of it actually. Although it was interesting what you said. You didn't talk to anyone about it for a long time. That was the same with me. I talked with one friend and told him about it. And he's on much the same wavelength as me, and it's like, well, don't worry about it. It's obviously some sort of message. You'll work it out. You don't have to talk to anyone else. And no, I don't. And it was only very relatively recently, a few years ago, that I started talking about it on podcasts, including, talking to you originally about it. That wasn't the first time. I think I talked about it once more before that, and now I wouldn't think twice about
No.
sort of, that's what happened. It was an important part of my life. If you don't like it, if you think I'm talking rubbish, well, that's your problem. So let's move on, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we'll leave the medical conditions. Don't worry,
For
everyone. We're
another
not going
day.
to go. No, no, we'll leave the medical conditions till the end.
Yeah.
Because I just really want to briefly talk about the two audio experiences that I've had, which are slightly different. And some people would say, well, it's not a fairy experience. And maybe they'd be right. I don't know. But one of them, the first one was actually before this encounter. This was in '94, when I was wild camping in South Dorset along the coast, that wonderful, the Jurassic coastline of South Dorset. Beautiful place, absolutely wonderful. Sort of west of Bridport is the town. And so I can't remember the second or third night, I decided to pick out a spot called Langdon Hill, which is near Golden Cap, very famous tourist place on the coast. Brilliant views, just inland, up a hill, Langdon Hill. It's got wood on it. Um, so I put the tent way away from the footpaths in the middle of the woodland, leave it as I usually do when I'm doing this, an hour before the sun sets. So you're not going to disturb anyone. No one's going to disturb you. And, you know, did the usual things and went to sleep. And I was awoken at 3 o'clock in the morning. I should just reiterate that this isn't my memory alone doing this. I did keep a journal when I used to go wild camping, and so I consulted the journal recently for a piece I wrote on this. And so 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm woken up. I'm quite a light sleeper in the tent anyway, so I was always waking up and going back to sleep. And I was awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I hear two female voices coming towards the tent. Uh, so that's odd. That's not good. I'm definitely awake. This isn't a dream. What are they doing here? 3 o'clock in the morning. And they came closer and closer and closer. And when they were properly within earshot, I recognized they were speaking a foreign language, and a language I could not understand. It wasn't Italian or French or Spanish, which I'd have picked up a few words. It was a very foreign language, and they were gabbling. They were gabbling it to each other non-stop. And they came closer to the tent. I'm still in the tent, remember, thinking, what's going on here? And they come past the tent, don't stop, don't slow down at all, past the tent and away until I can't hear it anymore. That was odd, I thought. and I've never been able to come to a proper explanation for that. But it's what were two women doing in that wood, quite relatively remote woodland, away from any footpaths, in the middle of the woodland, and they happened to come right past my tent and went past it as though the tent wasn't there. Uh, so there were no visual aspects to this; it was purely audio. Um, Many years later, I found out that Langdon Wood has the reputation of having had covens meet in it, and maybe not. That still goes on, and maybe it was going on in 1994, and maybe these two women were just breaking up from a coven. But even that, you're pushing it there, aren't you? The middle of a woodland, 3 o'clock in the morning, two women, doesn't quite sound right. And the fact that they were speaking this outrageous language adds to the mysteriousness of it.
Mm,
Um, and that's it. Is that a fairy type Is that a fairy type experience? Sort of, maybe, maybe not. But you can impose other supernatural explanations on it. Although I haven't been able to think of a rational explanation of it. And then very briefly, a very similar thing happened to me. What year was it? 2023, when we were in Glastonbury. I was with
mm,
you and Joe Hickey Hall. We were given a presentation. I went up Glastonbury. You went to the Fairy Fair. I went up Glastonbury Tour at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, and there was no one there.
mm,
Um, as anyone knows, Glastonbury Tour, that's extremely unusual. It was dry. It was pretty chilly, but it was dry October night, Saturday night, and there's no one on the tour. I've been up the tour hundreds of times, and I've never been alone until that night. I know other people say, "Oh, I've been there alone," but it's very unusual, especially at 10
mm,
o'clock on a Saturday night. And I was alone for about 20 minutes before I hear voices. This was two men and a woman, and I presumed I was sitting by one side of the tower, looking westward, and I presumed they were coming up path opposite, and I could hear them coming closer and closer. And again, they were speaking a language I can't understand. That language. I can't understand a word of this. And so I get up thinking, oh, I better make myself known so I don't shock them when they come round this side of the tower. And I walk round and there's no one there. The voices stop. I look all around the top of the tour, down the paths, down the side, in and around the tower. There's no one there. They're gone.
Mm.
Again, that's a very similar experience to the one in 1994, especially in regards to the language that was being used, or me not being able to understand any of the language. And again, they were gabbling. It was like a quick, like they were speaking in times two speed.
Mm.
And yeah, so again, uh, those two experiences, are they fairies? Is there some other explanation? I don't know, but they're very interesting experiences, even though there was no visual component to it whatever.
I think with things like that, if it feels fairy, then you're well within your rights to assume that it is. So when I say it feels fairy,
Yeah,
those experiences don't feel ghostly. They don't feel like it's a time slip. Obviously, with this other language that you can't get a grasp on of anything that would give you an indication of what part of the globe it's coming from. And a man of your intelligence, Neil, would have quite an understanding of at least the tonality of different languages, and the way that they're spoken. When you were saying about maybe it was witches in the wood from the first experience, I have witchy friends who will definitely go into woods at that time of night. However, I think you would more likely hear them talking in a language that you would understand, or at least be able to note. Um, but there is an air of something else, isn't there, when these things happen? It's
yes,
I've heard direct voice phenomena from spirit, from ghosts, and you can tell that that is from a spirit or a ghost, that that's coming through. Obviously, because they talk in English a lot of the time. In fact, the majority of the time. Well, I wouldn't say that that was fairy talking. I have heard direct voice phenomena and electronic voice phenomena of fairies. And again, the tonality and the kind of accent of those voices are different, are discernible, discernibly different to spirits of the dead. So I'm with you. I'm with you. I think that that was fairy noise. Now, if you don't mind, I'll tell you, I've had fairy noise phenomena, not voices. Again, in an ancient place, I had gone to the Rollright Stones with a friend of mine, and it's not the first time I'd experienced this. It was probably about the third or fourth time that I'd had this happen. And we'd gone there with a specific intention of doing an experiment at I want to say the standing nights. Is it the silent nights? The stones that are just down from the roll rights.
it's the king stones, isn't it? King
Kingstones.
stones.
No, that's at the back. There's the knights, which are the gathering of the. I think it's three stones.
Yeah,
Anyway, there's a legend connected to them that says that certain people under certain circumstances can approach the stones with a compass in the hand, and it will send the compass doolally. So we'd gone down there with dowsing rods and a compass. And I thought, well, this is going to be one of those phenomenon that, things that happen to everybody who tries this. So there's a fence around the stones. And once I passed my hand with the compass in through the fence towards the stones, sure enough, the compass would flicker all over the place and it wouldn't steady itself. Then my friend tried it and it didn't do it with her. And there were people around who were absolutely fascinated with what we were doing. So I had several people try it. And I think one of the person it occurred with, that the compass just did this, merry dance on its way around all the face of it. So that was weird. And I couldn't explain that. And I've not come across anybody who's had an explanation for that. But I would, at that point, I'm not very drawn to standing stones, and I find them energetically a little dull. which doesn't make me sound particularly a great hippie, does it? I was being drawn to the woodland at the side that runs away from the Rollright Stones. And I said, come on, let's go and have a walk in the woods. It was a baking hot day. Let's get out the sun. And as we were walking, and like I say, I've had this before. The only way I can describe it is 1,000 bees about a foot above my head. That low, lovely low hum of a I was going to say a flock of bees, then a swarm of bees,
Swarm. Yeah.
swarm of bees above my head, and it's that lovely vibrational feeling that you get from that resonance of bees en masse. So I look up and there is nothing there. And I said to my friend, can you hear that? And she said, what are you hearing? And I told her, and she said, I can't hear that at all. And we carry on walking and we come across somebody had started to make this huge labyrinth out of logs of wood in this woodland. So we walked the labyrinth and came back. I've experienced the humming bees with one other person who's heard it. And I didn't say anything to her. Again, it was in a woodland. And it sounds, it's that droning sound, but it sounds so close, it's unreal. I can't imagine it being a audio hallucination where you kind of get in a sound and it feels closer than it is. And I'd heard it and didn't say anything. And my friend actually exclaimed, where is that coming from? It sounds like hundreds of bees. And it wasn't until later that I started coming across people who had had similar experiences and also folklore references to that being the sound of fairies in flight, that it sounds like 100 bees. But I instantly, when I hear that sound, connect it to fairy without having that prior knowledge. I connected that with fairy because it feels fairy. And you can't really explain that to people, can you? That something feels fairy.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. There are a few examples of the buzz in the for Simon Young's fairy census,
Yes.
and I've seen it. Don't ask me which stories they're from, but there's a couple of folkloric examples of it as well. You know, the buzz.
Mm.
I even used it to some extent in my novel Dead but Dreaming, where
Yes.
the character goes into an altered state of consciousness and there's a buzz.
Mhm.
Yeah, the buzz,
Mhm.
and so yeah, no, that's very interesting. What you say, yeah, there's this thing, and of course about the feeling
Mm.
that it's fairy, and that's very difficult to articulate any further than that. You can't pin it down. You can't say, oh well, there's this motif, that motif. This is proof that it's fairy. It's just that sense that okay, this is what it is. There's some kind of fairy type phenomenon that you are experiencing, and you can't quite articulate why, because it's kind of ineffable,
Mm.
the experience. So yeah, no, that's interesting. And yeah, I guess that could apply to my audio experience. It did feel well at the time. I guess it just the first one definitely it just felt weird, whereas
Mm.
by the time it came to 2023 and Glastonbury tour, it's I've been investigating this for however many years, and it's are you fairies? Yeah. It's
Mhm.
Glastonbury tour. What better place would they be hanging out?
And on that weekend as well, where the fairy fair and the fairy ball was going on that night, if it's going to be an attractant, isn't it, to all kinds
Possibly,
of other beings, other be
possibly,
yeah, definitely. I
possibly.
mean, I
Yep.
don't. I hope you don't. I hope you don't mind me mentioning the cat, the shadowy cat. Can I mention? Can we talk about the shadowy cat briefly?
Well, what my experience?
And mine at the same time.
Okay, okay. Well, I know we're running out of time. I just we just we're such chatters, aren't we? We just
I know. I know. It's
we got another 10, 15 minutes. Yeah.
yeah. We've got plenty of time. It's our
Well,
podcast.
well, yeah. Well, just to lead on to that, I'm going to I'm not spend much time talking about my Charles Bonnet syndrome,
Oh
but
yeah.
it leads on. because it's been changing recently, and it will end or come to a,
Yes.
I'll bring it to a conclusion. Then you can talk about the shadow cats. And so let me keep this brief. 2015, I lose a lot of my eyesight, um, and very traumatic, terrible thing to happen at the time. I couldn't believe it. It was awful, absolutely awful, traumatic thing to happen. A few months after that, in early 2016, I started seeing fairies, fairies that were very, very similar to the one I saw in West Kennet. Not quite the same, and they were smaller, but I was seeing them in my cottage in Somerset where I lived at the time, and they just would suddenly appear. Usually three or four of them, always in the peripheral vision.
Mhm.
What the peripheral vision that I have in my right eye, and that is how they appeared to me. But I could kind of make out the details, the usual archaic clothes, humanoid appearances. They're not humans, and obviously not humans because they're sort of under a foot high. And they would just jump up on the armchair. They'd march around, go around in a circle on the floor, and I'm watching them, thinking I'm going insane. The trauma is just sending me insane. I really did think that at the time, even though I knew all about the fairy phenomenon, and I was thinking, yeah, they're fairies, but I'm making it up. This can't possibly be right. Um, and and they would, after this kept happening, and sometimes there would be audio communication, what I think of as telepathic, whether
Mhm.
it was telepathic or not. And since in the years that it's continued, I've never worked out whether it's actually telepathic or or not. But and they would never say anything really meaningful. The most meaningful thing they would say was stay calm. That was always the tenor of the experience. They would tell me, stay calm, stop being anxious, don't worry about it. What's the deal? Um, they even did that in Spanish once, where one of them said "Mentana la calma," which I had to go and look up. Oh, that's basically, chill out. And after this happened half a dozen times, I had an appointment with my ophthalmologist, who explained, oh, well, that's Charles Bonnet syndrome. And he said, don't worry about it. It's a hallucination. People who
Yeah, just
lose this.
don't worry
Uh,
about it.
it's more common than you think, Dr. Rushton. Don't worry about it. Many people have it. It's a hallucination. And of course, that is the reductionist, materialist,
Hmm.
get out clause for so many things. It's an hallucination. Don't worry about it. Can't possibly have any semblance of reality about it. And but at least I found out that there is something called Charles Bonnet syndrome. And then, of course, I went and investigated Charles Bonnet syndrome and found out that some people have crazy experiences. Some people very fairy-like experiences. Other people, ghosts, white ladies are quite common. Children, cartoon characters. That my favourite Charles Bonnet story is from Anthony Peake. I can't remember who he was talking about, whether it was a relation or a friend. And the woman was getting Charles Bonnet syndrome, and the uh, a gnome-like character came running into the room, followed by gnome-like creatures in a police car, and they got out of the police car, arrested the gnome, put him back in the police car, and drove back out the door. So it's just got to give you an idea of how crazy this syndrome can be. But so that's continued for years until this year, and it stopped. Sometimes it would happen every week, once a week, sometimes every fortnight, around about that sort of timing, until earlier this year, and it started to become less and less and less, and then it stopped altogether in the spring at some point. But recently, it seems to have been replaced by shadow creatures.
Hmm.
And there's once I was actually on with Kate, talking with Kate online, and I thought, oh, there's a black cat in here. There's some black cat's got into through my cat's cat flap, and he's in the house. I'm gonna have to, go around and find him. And of course, I went round, and there was no black cat.
What about that time though, where we were just chatting, we weren't recording, and that thing kind of bobbed in. You'd seen something, and it bobbed in to screen, and I was
Yeah,
like, "What was that?" It was like this just black figure, tiny
that
black
was
figure, just
that was after I was going to come on to that.
sorry.
You've preempted me. So that was this black cat, and but it wasn't a cat, and it was so real. It was just like that's the cat.
Mm,
He's in my house. He's not supposed to be. I'm going to have to find him, get him out. And no, that's weird. Then it happened before the time you're talking about. This happened again.
mm,
And by this time, I'm thinking, I wonder if this is the Charles Bonnet syndrome just taken on a different form. And
mm,
then at the time you and I were chatting, yeah, no, I got that mixed up. The first time I saw the cat, I wasn't chatting to you. This was the third experience of it when I was just sat down on my chair in the living room,
mm.
and I saw it, and it's we didn't record it. We weren't
No, I know.
recording the talk, and it came on screen, and you were like, "What's that?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, you can see it? Yeah, yeah." And then it just disappeared, and wow, well, what's that? And that's happened a few times, and it's always cat-like. There's a
Mm,
cat-like quality to it, and of course, we know the association of cats with witches and fairies and familiars,
mm,
especially black cats, and it is always jet black, like a
mm,
or like a shadow, and that's been happening relatively frequently. More, it's as though it's replaced the entities from the Charles Bonnet syndrome that I've had for years. They've seemed to have
mm,
gone, and this has taken their place. There's no audio with this. It's just the
mm,
shape never lasts for long, never lasts for long. And the only other difference is that previously with these very type entities, before they would appear, there'd always be some sort of geometric shift in the air.
mm,
You see a sort of geometric pattern, and often when they went away, that would happen. And sometimes the geometric pattern, that was all there is. Actually about 50% of the time, it's just the geometric pattern. That's all gone. And these shadow, whatever they are just suddenly there,
mm.
come into my view. I see them, interact with them, and then they're gone. And it never
Yeah.
lasts longer than 20, 30 seconds. If it, you know, well, obviously, if we're chatting privately, we're not going to be recording it, are we? But it's such a
No,
shame that that wasn't
I know.
recorded because
I remember.
it was very much, it was like, what's that?
I
And you
remember
saw
you
it.
saying. I remember you saying, "Can you see my Charles Bonnet syndrome?" And I was like,
Uh,
"I don't know, but I've just seen something." I mean, in terms of the black cat, what was interesting was it was a few weeks ago now, and I'd been chatting with Neil. Um, and I don't know what brought us onto the subject, but I had a really bizarre occurrence the day before. I had spent 3 days in Wales, probably 10 days before the incident, and I'd stopped at the Skirrid Inn, and I was particularly focused on the Welsh puka, um, doing some filming. Um, so I had been doing a lot of research, and
listen to you. Oh, what a lovely going. I was in Wales filming.
you just went out filming. That was a brilliant experience. We will talk about that when that all comes out. But so I've been immersed in Welsh culture and particularly the puka, which apparently I pronounced wrong. So I apologise to the whole Welsh kingdom. I'm sorry. Please don't come after me. So I don't know whether I manifested this thing psychologically, manifested it actually. I don't know what went on. I had gone to bed. I had a low light on in the bedroom. I wasn't asleep, and when I tell you that my dog Wilma is about as psychic as a house brick, I'm not lying. I've had occurrences, supernatural occurrences with her around, and she doesn't even stop snoring. This particular time, I had felt a pressure on the bed next to me and opened my eyes thinking it's the dog, because yes, the dog sleeps with me, had moved up the bed, to which I saw her down towards the bottom of the bed and she was tracking something. So her head was sort of fixed on the space next to me on the bed. And I looked at the space, and this thing, it was bigger than my dog. My dog's tiny, by the way, she's smaller than a cat. Slithered off the bed, went down onto the floor where I couldn't see it, and then came up and literally slithered up the door, to which it just melted into the darkness above the door. The weird thing was it was slightly pixelated, which is interesting. But it was a silhouette, and its head and the majority of its body looked like a black cat. But then it had this thick snake like tail. And my instant thought was, that's a puka, because that is one of the descriptions of them. And then I was chatting to you and said, I've seen this thing, and I told you the story. And you said, I've been seeing black cats. I think you'd seen one the day before or the same day. I don't know whether we're having a shift in energies, as in these darker energies are making themselves more known than the more benevolent fairy realms, and whether it's our state of being and our research that allows that to come into our consciousness and then sort of billow out, or whether there is a rise of the mischievous to the malevolent side of the fae that are making themselves aware.
I think there's a possibility of both those being correct at the same time.
Mm,
I think certainly, the circles we mix in, both folklorists and paranormal researchers, the that that there's very much a thing about them possibly, manifesting and invoking what all of our consciousnesses
yeah.
are concentrating on for long periods of time. If you do that, then you will, if you're talking about a Jungian collective unconscious, then you are drawing down, adding to it, and then drawing it down at the same time.
Uh-huh.
And there's, the more people who are doing it in a more concentrated way, then the more chance there is for these things to start manifesting within our particular reality under certain circumstances. I'm convinced about that. But whether they're turning malevolent, I mean, if you say shadow, what you describe as a puka, and pukas are usually quite malevolent.
Mm,
And um, uh, my shadow creatures, that I don't feel as though they're particularly malevolent, but they're not as pleasant as the
mm.
my previous experiences under the Charles Bonnet syndrome. They were always they were always just messing around. It was just
Yeah.
like, whereas this one's a little bit more sleeky, a little bit
Mm,
more, what the hell are you doing here? Why is this
mhm,
shadow moving into my existence? Although I haven't been scared of it. I'm not
mm,
thinking, oh my God, what's this? Whereas yours sounds a little bit further on, actually. And what you say about it being pixelated, I mean, people who are into the simulation theory
mm,
are going to jump on that and saying, well, it hasn't quite manifested in this reality, and therefore you're seeing it as a pixelated product of the
mm,
simulation.
mm.
Which is, well, it's interesting. I'm not sold on the simulation theory, but it's interesting in some ways. Although at first I thought you said it was pixie-lated.
Oh,
Oh,
no.
go away
There we
with it.
go.
Stop it.
Oh, we're getting into bad fairy jokes now, are we?
But yeah, no, no, very interesting. It's certainly been, from a personal perspective, it's very interesting how this phenomenon has changed over the course of this year.
Mm,
Because this year has been quite difficult for me, and the way the global situation is ramping up, things are, you could look at it and think things are really bad,
mm,
worse than they've ever been. And it could be just a reflection of that
mm.
you're reflecting it in your consciousness. Things are rubbish. So so the experience you have goes from something quite pleasant to something a little bit more
Darker.
sinister.
Definitely. Have you tried asking for your mischievous fairies to come back? Have you tried talking out to them?
In a sort of half-hearted way. That was never. that was never the deal. If that's what you want to call it. You know, they appeared whenever they wanted to, and when they appeared, I would ask them questions at first. Never got any sort of answer. It was never two-way communication. And after a while, I just gave up. And I even got to the stage of thinking, well, it, there's something not right about asking them. They don't want to be asked, and so just
Mm.
accept the experience. It's something. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not inconsiderate. You know, just not the right thing to do to try and communicate with them.
You know what though?
And
I always say this when I'm ghost hunting. The behavior that you accept from spirits, from other entities, would you accept that from a living human being? And if the answer's no, so hear me out. You've got these beings rocking up into your house. They're not paying rent, they're not bringing you a gift. I'd be asking blinking questions. I'd be saying, love having you around, you're great fun. However,
yeah,
let's have a deal of communication here.
yeah. Although they might have said, you know, their view might. Okay, let's go with the possible theory that they are consciousness remnants of the ancestors. And they might say, well, you know, we were here long before this house was here, sunshine, and we were definitely here before you. So
Yeah.
shut your mouth and put up with it.
True, or they could just tell you to bugger off, or they can do what they want, and there's nothing you can do to stop them.
Yeah, but these recent shadowy cat type creatures, whatever it is, there's no communicating with them. It's just kind of whoa.
It feels below. It feel when you come across those kind of entities, it feels like it's beneath them to even kind of recognize you as an equal to communicate with. And that's what I found. It is very cat-like in who are you? It's like with your cat Lucy looking at you earlier as if to go, what are you doing in my room?
Yeah. No, that's yeah, no, yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah, yeah.
Wow, that's been a lovely wild ride. We were just going to do one a piece tonight, so it's been good chatting different
Well,
elements.
that was good. And you know, apologies to people who've been with us for a long time. They've probably heard. Actually, they wouldn't have heard all of this, but they've probably heard our long barrow stories before. So apologies if we're repeating ourselves. But it was just I think it's interesting for people. And of course, as always in the comments, if you've had any similar experiences, we're always wanting to hear about them. And you know, I was going to say compiling a database. We're not compiling a database, but the more information we can gather
Mm,
from more people about these types of experiences, you know, as Simon Young has been doing, obviously with fairy sensors, you know, it's very useful. Not just as a research tool, but just as, you know, a growing a growing understanding of human
mm,
consciousness and how it might interact with these non-natural entities within our reality. That, you know, is
mm.
incredibly important, I think. And I think we're, you know, the more examples we have, the better understanding of it may be.
Definitely. And I think having other people around you, and listening to other people who have had experiences definitely helps for me to think, I no longer care whether people think I'm batshit crazy about these things. We know, like you said right at the very beginning, when you've had these experiences, and nobody can take that away
Yes.
from you. So it's good to talk to people, or to listen to people who've had weird experiences. If anybody's got any theories on anything that we've talked about, whether these cat creatures or any of the things that we've talked about, please do leave them in the comments. I always say, and it's true, we do read all the comments, and we have got our Facebook, YouTube community page that you can join. If you want to share any comments or any queries on there, then it's easier for technological Luddites like me and Neil to hop onto Facebook and chat with people than it is to come on the comments on here and keep that rolling. If you were to know how uncouth this technological system is that we both use, you would be in stitches. However we got on YouTube and however we got on there and however we stay on there with the setup and everything, I to this day do not know how it happened.
What are you
So
talking about? Look at you there with your mic. You look like a proper podcaster. Look like Joe Rogan. Well, you don't look like
I
Joe
know
Rogan, but you know what I mean, the setup.
the set. We're getting there. We're definitely getting there. So I think that's it. We've got some superb guests coming up. We've got a couple that are going to be coming up, releasing in December. One that we are both super excited about, which is remote viewing. I'm trying to remote view what remote viewing was. I couldn't remember the word then. I had a proper brain blip.
Yeah.
So we've got a past guest. I think it's time to leave, isn't it? I can't talk
Yeah.
anymore. We've got a past guest joining us to talk about remote viewing. It's something that he's very, very knowledgeable on, and something that definitely piques my interest. And I know that Neil is going to be looking forward to that one as well. We've got a few other people lined up. So hopefully December and January will be quite busy on the Hare and the Hawthorn. In between time, we're going to come back and we're going to do probably some more fairy senses, so reading and theorising about people's experiences in the fairy senses. And we're going to try something new in the new year, which is we are going to be looking at the different species, if that's the right word, of fairy, and doing a snippet of a show where we'll just go through briefly who's who in the fairy world,
That's
because
good,
who
actually.
doesn't want to know
Yeah.
who's who?
Who's who in fairy world? That's a new one. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So on that note, any further comments there, Dr.
No,
Rushton?
no, absolutely not. That was really good. Hope people appreciated it, and see you next time.
See you all later.